Okay. Connecting in. And I think we're good. Let's start the music. Let's actually start that from the beginning. What do you think? Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen here with life coach Cindy Chavez. Today is Wednesday, January the 29th, 2020. It's 4 p.m. New York time, and wherever you are in the world, thank you for joining us for another episode of LOA Today, your daily dose of happy. And once again, like yesterday, I'm happy to be back doing podcasts again because Cindy, as much as I loved, and I have to underline, loved our Florida vacation, I really miss doing podcasts, which sounds great. I mean, you'd think you'd go away and, that's what it's all about. And it was. But every night I think to myself, geez, I didn't get to do a podcast today.
Aw. Well, welcome back.
Thank you. Yes.
Welcome back.
I'm very glad to be back. Glad to be doing the show again with you and getting back to Neville, which we're almost done with that particular book, Seedtime and Harvest, aren't we? I mean,
we're getting there. We're on the 7th chapter, so there's about 2.5 chapters left.
Oh, okay. All right.
You know us. Who knows when we'll be finished?
But... Oh, it could be March for all we know.
But yeah, fine. But it's good. It's good. And I missed the podcast as well. However, I want to say I enjoyed hearing about your vacation.
Oh,
and,
it was.
I was gonna say I was a tad bit jealous of the Harry Potter trip because that's on my wish list. I really want to go. But I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed seeing all the pictures and hearing what you were talking about. So we
got so much feedback on those Harry Potter posts. I'm telling you, a lot of people are envious that they haven't gone yet. And I got to say, it's really worth it. I mean, it's pricey. We aren't ride doers. If you do the rides, it makes the pricing easier to go down. But even without, oh man, it's like walking onto a movie set. That's how great it is. It's really, really well done. And all the little shops, I mean, obviously they have to have some shops, particularly in Diagon Alley, that aren't in the movies because there just wouldn't be enough shops otherwise,
Right.
But the shops are great. They're really great. I mean, every single one of them is just done up to a T. Hogsmeade, you feel like you walked into a winter scene. You're in the middle of warm Florida temperatures and you feel like it's winter because there's all the snow on the roofs and you got icicles hanging down and so forth. You almost shiver walking in, but it's gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Oh, that's so much fun.
Well, one of the best parts is you also get to ride the Hogwarts Express between the two lands because there are two different sections of Universal's Florida vacation. And it's like a 10, 12-minute ride between the two sections. And when you're riding on the train windows become video screens and you get to watch a movie of stuff that's Harry Potter related while you're taking the trip. I mean, it's so cool. So you have like George and Fred Weasley flying by on their broomsticks and they throw up a dragon firework that breaks up into Weasley's Wizard Wheezes in Diagon Alley. Be sure to drop by, things like that.
Very cool. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yay.
Harry and Hermione outside the door to your compartment arguing about whether they should get something from the trolley, and then a Dementor shows up. I mean, it's great. It's just wonderful.
That's so much fun. Well, I'm glad you had a good time.
It was wonderful. Mm.
It's often the case too when you go away on a vacation that other areas in your life things shift and change, and that's always fun too. So I wouldn't be surprised if some of those things that you've been using the Neville methods on to manifest don't start manifesting because you shifted everything and shook everything up. It's kind of like a snow globe, right?
Well, actually, they've already started to. I mean, people who are members of the Law of Attraction Pivot Pals group that we started on Facebook will know that I posted a video there I call it my vision video. And it includes 3 scenes. First scene is about increasing listenership to the podcast. The second one is about our dream home. And the third one is about a dream trip to Hawaii. And the trip to Florida was like, it's not quite a trip to Hawaii, but it's like a step in that direction. So right. I feel like it's actually started to manifest anyway. And it's cool. Now, by the way, I was playing my video every day during the vacation because I didn't want to lose what I had built up already.
Nice. Oh, that's really good because that's something that sometimes does trip people up about a vacation is if they have any kind of meditative practice or whatever, it kind of goes by the wayside because we get out of our normal routine. And it's part of our routine. And so good for you. Wow, that's awesome.
Well, I'll tell you, it also is easier to do the routine when you're smiling every single day. I mean, literally, from the moment we got to the Universal Studios to do the Harry Potter to the end of Harry Potter, which for us was about a 2.5 hour period, I literally smiled the entire time. My face was hurting. I was smiling.
I love it. I love it.
Not to mention our other visits, because we went to Disney Springs with my brother and sister-in-law and had a nice meal at they call it the Rainforest Cafe, where while you're being served dinner, you're surrounded by all these rainforest themes, and they actually have a rainforest thunderstorm in the middle of it.
Yeah.
There was this family from France. A little girl was terrified by the thunderstorm.
Oh, no.
They were great kids. But yeah, I mean, there was that. We went to a chocolate museum. Believe it or not, Orlando has a chocolate museum.
I saw the pictures. I was like, wow, they were like replicas of famous buildings.
Yeah.
And they were all made of chocolate.
And really well done.
Cool,
I mean, I don't know if the photos did them justice, but I mean, you looked at them on display and they just blew your mind with the amount of detail that the chocolate maker went into. And it's one person.
How big were they?
I would say the average display was about 3 to 4 feet high.
Okay, I wondered that when I saw the pictures, because I didn't have a sense of scale, so they're much bigger than I thought they were. So
they are.
Wow.
I mean, you could tell these were baking projects that took a long time to do and probably weighed, a few hundred pounds because there was so much chocolate there. And the chocolate, I have to also do a little bit of a promo on their part because their chocolate is delicious. Really well done chocolate. We had hot chocolate before we took the tour into their museum section, because it's a restaurant. Well, it's a cafe. It's a cafe that has a little museum and tour in the back, and they give you a whole history on the history of chocolate. But we had some hot chocolate beforehand. I had a dark chocolate hot chocolate, and it was smooth. It was delicious. I mean, and of course with real whipped cream. I mean, I could easily go back there 4 or 5 times and probably put on about 10 pounds. So I'm glad I didn't do that. But
that'd be one of those things where say every day of our vacation we went to this chocolate place.
Yeah, right.
Especially with it being cold, right? It was colder. The weather was colder than you thought it was going to be. So it's like
lots of excuses.
To go get hot chocolate.
Absolutely. Oh, and you take advantage of it too when you're on vacation, right?
Hot chocolate with whipped cream is a vibe lifter. So the only reason you need right there is that it's a vibe lifter. So excellent.
Well, plus chocolate's healthy. I mean, you take the sugar away. Chocolate itself is actually very healthy. So, you kind of, change it around in your mind, right?
Practically a vegetable.
Or a legume anyway. But
right. So do we have any announcements before we dive in? I'm kind of excited to get this chapter discussed, because I think it's going to open up some really interesting ideas.
I think so too.
I want to make sure we cover announcements first, because you've been away a while. So
we do, and actually the announcements are pretty much what they used to be, but with a little extra added emphasis. The first one being, I mentioned earlier, the Law of Attraction Pivot Pals, and particularly those of you who have already posted your vignettes there, make sure you keep revisiting them just the way I was revisiting mine. Because that does make a huge difference, right, Cindy? I mean, if you're not doing the work, you can't really expect the results, right?
Right.
And the fact is that those people who have been doing are demonstrating, I want to change my life. I want to make big changes. I want to make important changes. So I also want to give kudos to those people because, hey, well done, you're doing it. And for those of you who've been lurking, well, now might be a good time to go in and post something. And if you haven't signed up for the group, just go do a search on Facebook for Law of Attraction Pivot Pals, and we'll be glad to let you in. Just cite the fact that you're a listener. That gets you in. That's your magic key to get into the group.
Oh, is there a question that says, what is the magic key? And they have to put, I am a listener.
It doesn't say what, I should change it to that. It doesn't actually say what is the magic key, but it says something like what's your interest level on this or something. So I like that one. I'll change that to the magic key question. That's a good one. And of course, we also want to encourage our listeners to become subscribers if they're not yet subscribers. Most people are these days. I'm finding that more and more people are, as they check us out, they're just subscribing automatically. So that's really great. But
very good.
Just in case you haven't become a subscriber, make sure you just go to the homepage of our website. If you don't know how to do it already, that is. Just go to loatoday.net, and at the top of the page, you'll find instructions on how to do it. many people, it's 1 click. Some people, it's 2 clicks, depending on what your particular device is and what software you've got installed. But it's really easy. Happens in about 30 seconds. And then all of our shows come streaming right to your device every single time we publish, which is great. And we know it's great because we are now, I don't know if I told you this, we're now officially over 500 listeners on average per episode. We've been kind of pushing that limit for a while. Well, I checked it out on vacation. I think I calculated to an average of 508. So we're officially over 500.
Very
and
good.
We're also, of course, encouraging people to subscribe on YouTube, because that we actually count YouTube in the overall subscriber count. It's a much smaller number, but still it counts. And you can watch us because sometimes it's fun to actually watch our expressions while we're doing this. I mean, podcasting is great because you get to listen while you're doing things. You don't have to sit down in front of a video screen or a TV
Right.
or whatever to watch us. But it also is fun to look on YouTube. So check us out on YouTube. Just do a search for LOA Today podcast videos and subscribe. Click the little bell so you get notified every time that we are live. And you can actually join us because we do the shows Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. New York time. So if that's a time slot that's available to you, you can actually tune in and join us on the live stream. Apologies to those who are on the live stream. Unfortunately, my second computer is not working properly, and I got a third backup that I haven't set up yet. So I'll get that ironed out in the next 2 days. So I can't interact with you guys today, and I couldn't interact yesterday. But don't let that deter you. Just become a subscriber anyway, because it's fun to
Talk
watch
amongst yourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Give us some notes about what we could do better. Send us a note. We like notes.
Because
So those are
sometimes
the
I notice in the comment threads from different live things that we've done, they're having a great discussion that I
no
usually know
kidding.
nothing about because I don't have that other monitor. And then so sometimes you'll fill me in later. Oh, there was this conversation going. I was like, awesome.
Yep.
So, if that's happening, perfect.
And it is great too, because our listeners, we have a very well-educated listenership, particularly about law of attraction, about conscious creation. I mean, people who listen are really, really knowledgeable, and it shows up in the comments. You see it. You can just tell how well they know it just from what they're saying. So if you're looking to learn more about law of attraction, or just trying to expand your own understanding, just listening to us in combination with watching the live stream can be tremendously powerful, because the live streamers have so much good things to say.
So true. Well,
Happy Neville Day.
It's Happy Neville Day. Yeah. Instead of Happy Hump Day, right? Wednesday, Happy Neville Day. I like that so much better. So we left off last time. It wasn't last week, because
No, it wasn't.
Walt was zooming around in Harry Potter world. So we left off sort of in the middle of a chapter, and I don't want to go back too far and like backtrack, but Neville was explaining constructing a representation that was of what you want, what you would be seeing and hearing and doing and being if you were having what you wanted. And it's very much what we're talking about in the Law of Attraction Pivot Pals. That's what's going on over there, is people are constructing a little vision of what they want. And so I'm going to start at the point, it may be a paragraph or so repeating, but where Neville says how this imagined state is realized physically is not the concern of you, the natural or outer man. And again, we're reading Neville Goddard's Seedtime and Harvest, and we're in chapter 7. But that idea always strikes me, because I think that's one of the ones that trips us up so much, is that we concern ourselves with how it's going to happen, whatever it is.
Including when we decide we're not going to decide how it happens, and yet we find ourselves doing it anyway.
Right.
You know what I mean? I'm determined I'm not going to worry about how, and then I spend 10 minutes on it.
But it makes sense, because that's mostly how we do create in the physical realm, right? It's like, if I want to make a meal, I immediately begin thinking of how that's going to come about. First, I'm going to make a list and find a recipe and go do the shopping and get the ingredients, and then I'm going to get out the utensils I need, whatever, right? So I think we do it sort of on autopilot, but when we're consciously creating something in this way, we don't have to concern ourselves with the how, which is wonderful news, because when we do, we often get all tangled up in the hows. It seems impossible, and so we just quit. And so I love that he mentions this again. He says, the spiritual body on its return from the imagined state to its former physical state created an invisible bridge of incident to link the two states. So the two states he's talking about are one, when you're in that imaginal place and you're imagining whatever it is, that's the one state. The second state is just your normal everyday state when you come back. He says you actually create a bridge between those two states.
And I like that, by the way. I mean, I hate to interrupt because you just got started on reading his stuff, but I want to contrast that with what others say. I'm going to pick one person who I really like a lot who says it a little bit differently, Dr. Joe Dispenza. When he's talking about this, he's talking about the difference between the true you and the fake you being not a fake you, but the body you, the collection of experiences that keep replaying the tapes and so forth, versus the true inner you. That those are the two that he differentiates between. And he talks about how it takes a lot of attention to the inner you to kind of overwrite the outer you, the physical you. Whereas this is talking about building a bridge. So I mean, there's nothing wrong with Dr. Dispenza's approach.
Right,
I mean, it's a metaphorical approach that suits what he teaches beautifully. But I like Neville's approach. It's a nice way of looking at it.
I think they can both be true. You know, Joe Dispenza, I saw a little clip of him somewhere recently that when I say little, I mean, it really was. It was like 1 minute.
Yeah.
And I sent it to a client because we had a discussion that was similar. And what he was saying in that clip, which is relevant here, is he talked about our personality, and he defined personality as what you think, what you feel, and what you do.
Right.
Right? And I was like, I thought that was really awesome because it was so succinct and specific. And when I've never defined personality before, right? I mean, so I was like, oh, well, that's pretty easy. It's what I think, what I feel, and what I do. That makes up my personality. He says your personality creates your personal reality.
Right.
And in order to change your personal reality, you have to change what you think, what you feel, and what you do. And I think that's what you're doing here. How do you change it? Well, it's changed for that moment that you're envisioning something different, right? I mean, That's what Neville is talking about when you go to that place where Neville uses the word immobilize your body, which cracks me up, but that's kind of what we do. If you ever went into a yoga class at the end, when everyone's or restorative yoga, or when everyone's in that savasana pose, right? Corpse pose, they're just laying there with their palms up, just immobilized. That's what we do when we meditate.
Meditation,
When we're there and we're envisioning the vignette, and Neville is telling us, make sure you're feeling it, you're seeing it, you're touching it, you're hearing it, you're really letting aren't we at that point changing our personality?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I think that Neville's idea and Joe Dispenza's idea here are interwoven, or can be. So he says, although the curious feeling that you were actually there and that the state was real is gone as soon as you open your eyes upon the old familiar environment, nevertheless, you are haunted with the sense of a double identity, with the knowledge that there is a natural body and a spiritual body. When you, the natural man, have had this experience, you will go automatically across the bridge of events, which leads to the physical realization of your invisibly prepared place. This concept that man is dual and that the inner man of imagination can dwell in future states and return to the present moment with a bridge of events to link the two, clashes violently with the widely accepted view about the human personality and the cause and nature of phenomena. Such a concept demands a revolution in current ideas about the human personality. This is funny because I had no idea that Neville was going to talk about personality, and we were just talking about Joe Dispenza's idea. He says, and about space, time, and matter, the concept that man, consciously or unconsciously, determines the conditions of life by imagining himself into these mental states leads to the conclusion that this supposedly solid world is a construction of mind, a concept which at first common sense rejects. However, we should remember that most of the concepts which common sense at first rejected, man was afterward forced to accept. These never-ending reversals of judgment which experience has forced upon man led Professor Whitehead to write, "Heaven knows what seeming nonsense may not tomorrow be demonstrated truth."
I like that.
We talked about this last time, about how certain things that were thought to be ridiculous, now science has proven them, or they're just common knowledge now.
It's funny too how when that happens, it's a transition that is triggered by some event or some person, or there's something that happens that makes people start to rethink it. Actually, it doesn't make them start to rethink it. They decide to start rethinking it because the new event or the new person or thought or whatever gave them a perspective they didn't have before, and that new perspective makes them think, well, geez, maybe we really should be saying that Einstein was right all along instead of rejecting it or whatever,
Right. Newtonian physics has passed, and we're moving seriously. We're moving into, a different realm of belief.
Well, it's an interesting thing about that. This also ties into the vacation, by the way, because one of the things that we did on our vacation is I got the chance to visit with my cousin, Becky, who I hadn't seen in many years and hadn't had a chance to ever really sit down and talk with her. She's a wonderful person. She's a total believer in law of attraction, very positive person. And so it was really great to talk to her. But I also got a chance to talk to her husband, Ray. Now, they're both retired. Ray he had a PhD in chemistry and had a whole career in chemistry and crystals. And he was telling me all about his crystals explorations from a chemistry and physics point of view. But we were also talking about the sciences, and I gave him some clues that I was interested in LOA, and he was giving me the usual scientific pushback and so forth. But nevertheless, he gave me some really interesting concepts to play with. And I think I mentioned one of them yesterday, but I'll say that one again, but I'll also mention what made me think of it when you were talking here. The first thing he told me is, and this kind of really goes against the grain, science is not about proof. Science is about gathering data.
I was going to say, and discovery. Yeah.
And discovery, yeah. Whereas math is about proof. Yeah. But so many scientists have kind of blurred the boundary and they want to try to prove things. Well, no, it's not about proof. So that to me is a useful thing to keep in mind. Right. But the second thing that he pointed out, and I'm now drawing a little bit of blank about what you just said, so I'm trying to get over to what you said because it was really, really relevant. You were just saying, what was it?
I was just saying that Newtonian physics.
Newtonian physics.
Beyond that now, with what we've learned from Einstein and what the quantum scientists are finding out now.
And what Ray was saying was Newtonian physics is wrong in the world of quantum physics, but it's very appropriate at slow speeds. Quantum physics is about what happens when everything gets really, really fast. Newtonian physics works great at really, really slow speeds. So actually, it isn't completely outdated. It's just been modified to its true reign. It used to be that we thought that Newtonian physics was everything. Now we know, well, no, Newtonian physics doesn't cover everything. It covers very specific cases. And in those cases, it works brilliantly.
Well, and it sounds like you're talking about, there would be some relevance to vibration, right? Because You're talking about speeds. You're talking about slow speeds, very hyper fast speeds. And that's rate of vibration.
Absolutely it is. So, now, I wasn't going to say that to Ray because I didn't want to upset the apple cart too much. But that's exactly what I was thinking too. Like, oh my God, whenever we're talking about just dealing with the real world, that's slow speed stuff. So, of course, Newtonian physics does apply. Well, who knew?
Seriously, that's fantastic. I love it. All right. So Neville, moving on, begins, he quotes some scriptures from the Christian Bible. He says the creative power in man sleeps and needs to be awakened. And then he quotes Ephesians, "Awake thou that sleepest, and arise from the dead. Wake from the sleep that tells you the outer world is the cause of the conditions of your life. Rise from the dead past and create a new environment." And then he quotes 1 Corinthians, "Know ye not that ye are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you? The Spirit of God in you is your imagination." There's Neville defining his, using his own decoder ring there, right?
Yes, right.
The Spirit of God in you is your imagination, but it sleeps and needs to be awakened in order to lift you off the bar of the senses where you have so long lain stranded. I think it's interesting because the background of the text I'm reading is a beach. And so I think he's talking about a sandbar here. Right?
Ah, yes.
Been stranded on this bar of the senses, meaning that We often only believe what we see, and not in our envisioning state, but in our normal waking state. We need to see it to believe it. And of course, Neville's not going to agree with that we have to see something or touch something or hear something to believe it, to have it come into our physical reality. We can do that in the imagination, what he is talking about. That's the creative faculty. So he says the boundless possibilities open to you as you become wise as serpents is beyond measure. That's the name of the chapter, by the way, wise as serpents. You will select the ideal conditions you want to experience and the ideal environment you want to live in, experiencing these states in imagination until they have sensory vividness. You will externalize them as surely as the serpent now externalizes its skin. After you have outgrown them, then you will cast them off as easily as the snake throws her enameled skin. The more abundant life, the whole purpose of creation, cannot be saved through death and resurrection. God desired form, so he became man. Now, this is very Christian thinking here.
Absolutely.
But knowing Neville, remember, Neville's talking about God being imagination.
Consciousness.
Right? So if our imagination desired form, it would become something that had form. So he says it's not enough for us to recognize his spirit at work in creation. We must see his work in form and say that it is good, even though we outgrow the form forever and ever. And I don't know how that hits you, but for me, when I hear it, it kind of, it's really useful to me because I have a tendency to take a long time to make certain decisions because I have to remind myself that every decision is just a choice. It's not a forever decision. You know, if I manifest something I decide I don't want, I can give it back.
That's true.
I can change it. I can manifest something else. And I think that's what Neville is pointing to here when he talks about outgrowing it. Like he's like, yeah, you're going to manifest it. And just like the snake skin, you're going to outgrow that thing too. And then you'll cast it off and you'll create something different. Right? So I don't know if that's a problem for anyone else, but it's been a problem for me. And that sometimes when I go to set out to consciously create something, I really overthink it too much. And I overthink all the possibilities of it. And, you know, I'm getting better and better at just saying, oh, I'm just going to create this.
It's actually
if I don't like it, I'll change it.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's a very relevant point and one that we easily overlook. The idea that these things, these big goals, these big things I'm trying to attract into my life, they don't have to be the last things I attract. In fact, I don't have to be limiting myself exclusively to attracting them. So often we do that. We think, well, okay, once I get the house and once I get the job, I'll be all set. I'll be done and everything will be great. Well, actually, no, you'll be dead if you give up at that point. You have to keep going for new stuff after that, for new experiences. You have to keep growing and growing and growing. That's what life is all about. So it's actually kind of self-limiting to say, that's all there is.
Well, and I like to think about that nature, it's the nature of nature, if you will, to expand.
Absolutely.
I mean, you and your wife have run a landscaping business, so you understand that, right? You know, I mean, you plant certain things and they're going to expand.
They do.
Anybody that's ever had mint or something take over their garden understands this. So it's the nature of nature to keep expanding, and we're part of nature. Like we are always going to have something else that we desire. Like there's nothing wrong with that. And when we think about creating something and we stop ourselves, because I've been talking about this with clients a lot lately, because our logical mind comes in, like our intuition, what Neville talks about, that creative faculty wants to create something, has a desire. And then suddenly there's all this logic coming in about why that's not a good idea, what could go wrong, all the reasons why. And remember that lizard brain, or what I like to call the squirrel brain, is the very primal part of our brain, hates change. Because why? Because it doesn't like uncertainty. It doesn't like to feel not safe. It doesn't like to go into, territory that we don't understand yet. But it does know that it has survived yesterday.
Exactly.
And the crappy job, the bad marriage, all the things that survived yesterday, it still survived them. So it's like, we can hang here for a little while. Don't change things. You don't need to create something better. And that logical part of our mind that primal brain can tap into that left brain logic, and boy, oh boy, are some of us good at coming up with fantastic excuses why not to allow ourselves, right? We're talking about allowing to have whatever it is.
No
And
kidding.
we're so good at it. And that's one of the things I help clients do, is recognize that it's just a shadow. It's that survival archetype that's it operates there in that place where all it cares about is surviving. And so it's really hard to consciously create when we get stuck in those logic loops.
Well, plus that's what we did, you and I, when we started doing this series about Neville Goddard, because and this book was one of the subjects of that little concern. Like, well, neither one of us are Christians, and we were really concerned about all those biblical verses, and
Right.
how if we can handle all that. So we do what we thought were the easier ones. Now, here's the really ironic thing: we're now doing seed time and harvest, and it doesn't seem like there are all that many biblical verses.
It's kind of funny, really.
What
Well,
happened?
the thing is about both of us have a pretty large experience in that area.
Right.
And I can only speak for myself, but I mean, I taught for like 18 years. And so I have a lot of, knowledge of the whole area. And I just didn't want to go there.
Right.
Because it's not my area. It was an area of expertise, and I left it. So it's like, yeah, I don't want to go here, but you're right. We talked about what if this and what if that. And now we're here. And, like you said, and it's always like that, right? We leave our comfort zone and we go, oh, what was I worried about? This
Exactly.
is not that bad. This is actually wonderful. Like, I'm discovering new things. Why did I stay over there in that comfort zone that was so uncomfortable?
And what was I seeing? What was I seeing? Because when we looked at this before, both of us had the same reaction. Oh my God, it's packed full of biblical verses. No. And it's not.
Okay, well, speaking of, we're going to read a couple of them now, and then we will. Going.
Yes.
First is a poem. I don't know where it's from. He doesn't give attribution. He leads through widening chambers of delight to where throbs rapture near an end that eye recedes, because his touch is infinite and lends a yonder to all ends. I'm not sure where the attribution is. But then
sounds like Proust, but I don't know.
Then he quotes from John. Oh, do you have attribution in your text?
I do not. No, I'm just speculating.
Okay. Then he quotes from John out of the Christian Bible. He says, and if I be lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men unto me. Then this is Neville speaking. He says, if I be lifted up from the evidence of the senses to the state of consciousness I desire to realize and remain in that state until it feels natural, I will form that state around me and all men will see it. But how to persuade man this is true? That imaginative life is the only living, that assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled is the way to the more abundant life and not the compensation of the escapist. That is the problem. This is really interesting paragraph here where he says, I like this phrase, the compensation of the escapist.
Yes, good one.
I had an experience one time where when I was first teaching this stuff, it was about, I don't know, a dozen years ago. And I was talking about the idea of, I wasn't using terms like vignette, but I was talking about when you go into a meditative state and you're envisioning what you want to create, allow yourself to feel the pleasure of it. Allow yourself to really get into how wonderful that thing is, and do it for that reason alone. Just get aligned for alignment's sake. Just do it because it's enjoyable. And the person I was talking to, who was wanting to create more abundance, more money, richer lifestyle, more, ease, said, I don't want to do that. I don't want to enjoy it just because it's enjoyable to think about it. I want the real thing. I want the manifestation. And I said, I kept trying to explain, but see, you're so attached to an outcome. Like, if you'll just allow yourself to enjoy envisioning this just because it's enjoyable. No. And this is why, this right here, because they could not be convinced that this was actually going to create something and that it wasn't just the compensation of the escapist, right? They were saying, no, I don't want to just be happy thinking about it. I want to be happy because I have it.
Yeah.
I think that's what Neville's getting at here. How how to persuade man that imaginative life is the only living, and that assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled is the way.
Yeah.
And I realized that they did not want to enjoy this. They did not want to let this, they didn't want to allow this to feel good. Because they were worried that if they were satisfied with feeling good in this envisioning, that the thing would never happen, because it was like they would be saying, well, this is enough. This is good.
Yes.
So they prevented themselves from being willing to even undertake the process.
Which is ironic, because the fact is, it is a form of manifestation. I mean, if you are starting off with, okay, I'm just going to go for a feeling, so I'm going to focus on a better feeling, and you get more better feeling thoughts, you just manifested. It's just that they weren't physical things.
Right.
You know?
So if the first part is, I'm so distressed because I don't have enough money, and this is really hard, and it is hard when you don't have enough money. And so if the thought is, this feels terrible, I'm worried all the time, I don't know how I'm going to make ends meet, I hate this, and the envisioning it, if only for 10 minutes, it's like I was completely free of worrying, I was free of, of all of those catastrophic thinking, but I don't want to do that, because that's only 10 minutes and that's not the real thing.
It's funny how our different perspectives affect us in a big, big way, because my perspective very early on was, I really didn't have a whole lot of confidence in my ability to attract anything, So I figured, well, attracting a better feeling, I can handle that one. So I'll do that one. I don't know if the rest of it can work, but I know I can make that one work. So I'll do that one.
Well, and it's like, okay, so I feel better for 10 minutes. Hey, it's 10 minutes that I felt
That's
better.
right. Yeah.
But I think there was this idea that, like, if I accept that, then maybe the real thing will never come along, because I'm just like, I'm giving in, I'm accepting, I'm settling. That's the word I'm looking for. Oh, I'm settling for just meditating for 10 minutes, and I don't want to do that. So it was very interesting when I read this, the compensation of the escapist. I thought, okay, that's what that was about. So Neville says, to see as the widening chambers of delight. So he's quoting from that poem we read a minute ago.
Right.
What living in the realms of imagination means. To appreciate and enjoy the world, one must live imaginatively. One must dream and occupy his dream, and then grow and outgrow the dream forever and ever.
That's an interesting phrase there. Outgrow the dream. That's what we were talking about earlier, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I got this thing I wanted. Now what? Well,
now,
I just outgrew the dream.
What's next?
Yeah.
Right.
And it's cool, because this is something Louis de Souza really expresses nicely. When you achieve, having manifested this amazing thing, like he has manifested going from Coke bottle glasses to the thinnest lenses that are about to go away.
Ooh,
he has really shifted it. I mean, it's a major, major shift.
Yes.
And I asked him what it feels like, and his answer is, it feels normal. It feels normal. And that's the key. It feels normal.
Yes.
He made it feel normal, so it became his norm.
That is Neville in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Right? He said it so many times, even in this one chapter. So here's what's interesting. We're talking about occupy the dream.
By the way, I also have to clarify something, because I want to make sure, just in case Louis listens, Louis is a big Abraham Hicks fan. Abraham Hicks is the only one he's interested in. So I'm not saying that he's justifying Neville here because he supports Neville. I want to make sure I make that part clear, but he is justifying Neville.
Well, Neville here talking about to appreciate and enjoy the world because you're living it imaginatively, occupying the dream, having the dream and occupying it and then outgrowing it. The next paragraph, maybe what we were just talking about, the unimaginative man. So this is the person that Neville is not doing the Neville stuff at all. He's not consciously creating his life at all. He says the unimaginative man who will not lose his life on one level that he may find it on a higher level. And that's it. Is nothing but a Lot's wife, a pillar of self-satisfied salt. On the other hand, those who refuse form as being unspiritual and who reject incarnation as separate from God are ignorant of the great mystery Great is the mystery. God was manifest in the flesh.
And by the way, that phrase, going back, that phrase that you read there, we talked earlier about how I was contrasting Dispenza and Goddard. That's right out of Dispenza. He talks about leaving yourself behind and developing a new surf. That's exactly what Neville just said.
Well, and what I see some of that in this idea, using the example of the person that I spoke to that was so miserable in their life, but they weren't even willing for 10 minutes to lose that misery and enjoy a 10-minute visualization where they felt free of all of that stress. See, it says the unimaginative man who will not lose his life on one level that he may find it on a higher level. Like they weren't even willing to lose that stress for 10 minutes. I thought
I'm sympathetic to them. I really am. I mean, I feel bad for them in one sense. On the other hand, I'm also recognizing though, and you could probably fill in that part of the story, but I mean, when you have that kind of really high level of resistance, at some point it creates a crisis. And if you're somebody who is really trying to grow, you'll grow through that crisis, even if you do it the hard way. And when you come, even when you come through it the hard way, that's when you get the biggest springboards. So, so that could actually, I don't know what happened with that particular client, but that could actually have turned into this major springboard where he or she finally broke through and said, okay, I'll give it a try. Boom, they bounced out. I'm like, whoa, what just happened?
It wasn't a client. It was somebody that I knew. And that was, I had wished that I would have been able to coach them. But, I don't coach people clandestinely. I don't coach people without them knowing it. They have to ask for.
You're a very ethical person, I have to say.
But so what you're talking about, we have a name for that. It's like the slingshot effect. It's like the thing that has held you back so strongly for so long. At some point, it's going to be the thing that zooms you forward, right?
Yep.
So right. I mean, it all works out. So Neville says your life expresses one thing and one thing only, your state of consciousness. Everything is dependent upon that. As you, through the medium of imagination, assume a state of consciousness, that state begins to clothe itself in form. It solidifies around you as the serpent's skin ossifies around it. But you must be faithful to the state. You must not go from state to state, but rather wait patiently in the one invisible state until it takes on form and becomes an objective fact. Patience is necessary, but patience will be easy after your first success in shedding the old and growing the new, for we're able to wait according as we've been rewarded by understanding in the past. Understanding is the secret of patience. I had a conversation with a client recently about this very thing. And it was that I think I said, the situation this client was in, I said, you've been telling this story and in this situation for more than a decade. Yes. Yes. And so I can tell you right now, working with me for 12 weeks, it's not going to immediately change as soon as you start doing this work. It's like muscle memory. And I used this example that just came to me, but I said, I put a new granite countertop in my kitchen. The granite countertop sticks out 1/16 of an inch more than the old tile countertop used to stick out. That's not very much, is it?
No.
But for the first 6 months I had it, every time I unloaded the dishwasher, I hit a glass on the edge of it.
Oh, man.
And it was blowing my mind that it was 1/16 of an inch and that my muscle memory, like how many times have I unloaded dishes where I just missed the tile countertop by a millimeter.
And didn't know it.
Right. And didn't know it. And now that it was sticking out, I was just hitting it all the time. Until one day I started moving my hand a little bit differently. Consciously, right? Recognizing I have to take this out a little bit differently. And until that became the muscle memory. And now I never hit it. And so it's like that with these kind of things. When we're changing who we are, when we're changing our story, we don't usually just change our story And 6 weeks later, our entire life has changed when we've had that story going on for a decade or 20 years or 30 years.
It's
So
funny that you tell that story because it reminds me of a dishwasher experience that I had and still experience. Because in our home, the dishwasher door where it opens is, in a sense, it's between me and where we store our plasticware for putting stuff in the refrigerator.
right.
And that's not the way it was in our previous home. So when we first got here, I had a tendency, if the dishwasher door was down, to bang my shin against the dishwasher door that when it was down, trying to get over to the plastics. And you don't do that too many times before you really want to make a change. So now I've actually learned how to swing my leg out for my first step subconsciously. I don't even think about it anymore, just so that I miss that. That's exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. I'm talking about that our brain, the neural connections in our brain that have to do with how we think and how we feel and how we act, that we get grooves, we get connections that are wired together. And it's like that muscle memory that had me hitting the counter every time.
Right.
It takes some time. And this is what Neville's talking about here. Wait patiently. Know that it's going to happen. We have to have patience. Neville says, what natural joy and spontaneous delight lie in seeing the world, not with, but as, Blake says, through the eye. Imagine that you are seeing what you want to see and remain faithful to your vision. Your imagination will make for itself a corresponding form in which to live. All things are made by imagination's power. Nothing begins except in the imagination of man. From within out is the law of the universe. As within, so without. Man turns outward in his search for truth, but the essential thing is to look within. So he doesn't give attribution here, as within, so without, but he's quoting from the Emerald Tablet. That's Hermes Trismegistus there. Central truth that most magicians know, as within, so without, as above, so below. Then he quotes Browning from Paracelsus. Truth is within ourselves. It takes no rise from outward things, whate'er you may believe. There is an inmost center in us all, where truth abides in fullness, and to know rather consist in opening out a way whence the imprisoned splendor may escape, than in effecting entry for a light supposed to be without. He says, I think you'll be interested in an instance of how a young woman shed the skin of resentment and put on a far different kind of skin. The parents of this woman had separated when she was 6 years old, and she had lived with her mother. She rarely saw her father, but once a year he sent her a $5 check for Christmas. Now we have to remind our listeners that this was written decades ago.
When $5 was actually worth something.
Right. Following her marriage, he did increase the Christmas gift to $10. After one of my lectures, she was dwelling on my statement that man's suspicion of another is only a measure of his own deceitfulness. And she recognized that she had been harboring resentment towards her father for years. That night, she resolved to let go her resentment and put a fond reaction in its place. She did it over and over until she caught the spirit of her imaginary act, and then she fell asleep in a very contented mood. The following day, she happened to pass through the fur department of one of our large stores in California. For some time, she had been toying with the idea of having a new fur scarf, but she felt she could not afford it. This time, her eye was caught by a stone marten scarf, and she picked it up and tried it on. After feeling it and seeing herself in it, reluctantly, she took off the scarf and returned it to the salesman, telling herself that she really could not afford it. As she was leaving the department, she stopped and thought, Neville tells we can have whatever we desire if we will only capture the feeling of already having it. In her imagination, she put the scarf back on, felt the reality of it, and went about her shopping, all the while enjoying the imagined wearing of it. This young woman never associated these two imaginary acts. In fact, she had almost forgotten what she had done until a few weeks later, on Mother's Day, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. There was her father. As she embraced him, she remembered her first imaginary action. And as she opened the package he had brought her, the first gift in these many years, she remembered the second imaginary action, for the box contained a beautiful stone marten scarf.
Wow.
And then he quotes Psalms, "Ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High." And Matthew, "Be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves."
I love Neville's stories. I think we all do, particularly because they're so good at bringing the person not kind of what they wanted, not close to what they wanted, but exactly what they wanted.
Right?
And it always is surrounding a situation where the person decided to change their behavior, to change their perspective. They decided to say, you know, maybe this Neville character really does know what he's talking about. So I'm going to try this thing, even though deep down I have this feeling it really is a bunch of baloney and it's not going to work. But I'm going to try it anyway, and I'll do it really well and as thoroughly as I know how to do. And then they get what they're looking for.
Well, you know, because I've talked about it a lot on our podcast, but one of the methods, I guess you would say, that Neville has presented that I love so much is the one that has to do with recreating a memory, especially when it involves another person, with recreating a conversation. It's like revising history a little bit there, which I'm not always in favor of when it happens in the real world, but when it's an emotional charge with something that we have, so often it has to do with, you know, some interaction we've had with another person, like this woman who said she'd been carrying around this resentment towards her father for years and years, and finally decided to just let it go, and imagined having different feelings towards him. And one of the things I practice this with myself on occasion, and I instruct, you know, students and clients to do it. And that is when you have an emotional charge from some conversation you've had or some interaction, and to me, I say that the goal isn't having some outcome like this. The goal is just doing it. If you've done the work, then you've met the goal. So the goal is that you reimagine that conversation differently, as if you had said, you know, we've all walked away from a conversation, we're upset at what the other person said, and we may be upset at what we said. It's like, it's like, I wish I would have said something differently. And so go back and imagine it the ideal way, the way you wish it would have happened. Hear the other person saying what your heart would have loved to hear them say. Hear yourself saying something kind, something you would have wished you could have said. Imagine the conversation in a more beautiful way, for the sole sake of feeling better, letting go of that emotional charge, not feeling so angry or frustrated or resentful. And then the magic happens.
Yeah, that's true. And
Right?
it's funny as you're describing that, I'm reminded of, there's at least 2 books, I think, where Neville talks about what he calls the pruning shears of revision.
Yes,
And
yes.
you just described that beautifully.
Right.
Although I have a question for you, because you kind of surprised me. I'm really curious to know what the background on this is. You said you're perfectly fine and in favor of doing it emotionally, but in the real world, you have questions about that. And I'm curious, what are you
I
thinking
use the
about
term
that?
revisionist history. I'm not a fan of actual people rewriting history, such as in textbooks that say something different than what actually happened.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well,
So,
you're right, but that is the problem. It's both a problem and solution, all wrapped up in one. Because literally, I mean, how many people have pointed out that the word history is 2 words, his story? And in fact, that's what history is. History is a story told by the historian, and you can get different stories told by
yeah.
different historians that actually contradict each other.
Well, and what we often hear, tongue twisted, what we often hear is history is written by the victors, right?
Often true.
So when I talk about, when I found myself saying the words revisionist history, I was like, well, that's not exactly what I mean, but it is what I mean in this instance. And that is, allow yourself, what we've been talking about most of this podcast, to allow yourself to feel better and to use this imagination. Because when you worry or fret over something, you are binding yourself to it in consciousness.
I think you're putting your finger on it right there. The fact is that revising history is fine. The real question isn't whether it's right or wrong to revise history. The real question is, how does revising history help or harm you? What does it do with your life? What does it do with your perspective? If revising history is going to make your life miserable, what the heck are you doing it for? You need a different topic there. But if
Right.
revising history is going to help you, if it's going to get you into a better place, then go for it. Who cares? It doesn't matter. It's your history. It doesn't matter.
Right. And it's your history is the thing. And we are talking about your memory of the conversation or the incident. We're talking about your emotional charge that you have around it, because this happens a lot, right? Somebody is offended or upset about something and they replay that conversation and that
Oh,
incident
yeah.
in their head over and over. They tell their friends about it. They talk about it. They say, this happened. He said this to me. She said this to me. He did this to me. We say it over and over and over and over. And all we're doing is just pumping up that emotional charge, and we're binding ourselves to that situation in consciousness. So when we can just reframe it in a different way, tell it in a different way for the sole purpose of letting go of that emotional charge, then we won't be bound to that incident anymore in consciousness, and things will change.
Which is one of the things we were talking about at the very beginning of the episode. We were talking about how, we get into these things where we say, okay, I'm going to make some change. And then we go right into all the ways we're not going to change it and why we can't change it and why it would never, ever change. And then we stick to that for like 10 minutes and say, yeah, but I really am committed to change. We are funny people. We are.
I'm glad that you brought that up. The pruning shears of revision. Yes. That's exactly what we're doing when we do that. We're revising our experience.
It's a wonderful concept, and I'll be the first one to admit it threw me for a loop the first time I heard it, because I was thinking to myself, well, I can't change my past. It was almost like there was something wrong with that, like sacrilegious, changing my past, pretending that it didn't happen the way it did, but it did happen the way it did, and I got hurt and all this terrible stuff out. It did happen. It did happen. It did happen. We really hang on to these things.
We do. Yes, we do. And, the other thing is, like we talked earlier about deciding to create something, and then that logical brain like partners up with the primal brain and starts giving us really great excuses why not. That can happen with this as well, because the person will say, well, that person's not going to change.
Yes.
Right.
Isn't that an interesting point right there? So often when we look at, I think that's where my own resistance came from. So often when we look at this idea of revising our history, other people are involved in our history. Right. They're part of our story.
Yeah.
So we feel like, well, if I change the story, I'm trying to change them. And boy, is that a hard task. We get caught up in that stuff.
And so that's why I always say, I have a process that I teach clients for communication. It's not a magical conscious, creation thing. It's just a communication process.
Mm-hmm.
But what I always tell people once they've learned it is that using it is the goal. If you use this process, you've succeeded. Yeah. It's not if you use the process and then that person didn't respond the way you wanted them to, and so you say it didn't work. No, if you used it, then that's the goal.
That's a great point.
Yeah, and that's how I feel about this as well. It's when we go back and we rethink a conversation the way we wish it would have happened. Good, then you did it. You feel better? Does it feel better to think of it that way? Does it feel better to imagine that person saying something kind to you and loving than saying something, mean and unkind? Then it worked. Then it did it. You did it. You did the process. And then the icing on the cake or what we call here in Louisiana, lagniappe, means a little extra. The lagniappe is when things actually change in the real physical world. Sure. And that person calls and is kind to you, right? That's just the icing on the cake. Mm-hmm. It's not why we do it. We do it because it feels better.
Well, we mentioned Dr. Joe Dispenza earlier in the podcast, and I think the reason I brought him up is because on the plane down and on the plane back, I was reading his book, You Are the Placebo, because I hadn't actually read it cover to cover. So I got about 2/3 of the way through it. And in that book, he describes, in fact, he's also described this in videos that I've seen on YouTube. He describes how, somebody who does the meditative process that he advocates in his workshops and classes and in his books and so forth, and does it from a place of they have cancer or eczema or some dread disease or some condition that's been bothering him for years, and then all of a sudden they're healed of it, which blows his mind. He can't believe it. I mean, he's standing there doing this thing, and people stand up and say, I just cured my cancer. Like, really? Wow. It's kind of mind-bending to experience that. But as he points out, all they're really doing is learning how to get into that really high volume, high vibration place. And once you're there, why would you ever want to leave it? So, you're presented with the opportunity of going back and reliving that old history. Why would I want to do that? Then I'll fall back down out of this thing that I'm in right now that I
Right.
really, really
Yeah,
like.
exactly.
So I think that's where a lot of the perspective really comes into it. If you recognize that pruning shears of revision is really about getting yourself into that high flying place and not leaving it, well, it's an entirely different kettle of fish at that point.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's radical responsibility for your own personality.
Exactly.
How you think, how you feel, and how you act. That's it.
Speaking of radical responsibility, I want to radically be responsible for reminding people how to reach out to Cindy Chavez, the life coach, and please tell people how to do that.
They can reach me at cindychavez.com, CINDIECHAVEZ.com. There's a contact form there. I would love for you to give me a shout and say hello.
And we love it when you do that, because especially if you have something nice to say, we bring it up on the show. So hint, a little bit of a incentive there. Cindy, thank you so much. So good to be doing Neville again after a 10-week delay.
So good to be back.
Good stuff, and we got a couple of chapters left, so more stuff to look forward to. We may even get it done in February. Who knows?
We might do it.
So, meantime, thank you very much for all of your insights and expertise. We really appreciate that. Thank you, live streamers. Sorry we couldn't interact with you. I promise I'm going to get that fixed so that I can actually see while we're doing the podcast what you guys are saying. But in the meantime, we really appreciate you. And we especially appreciate all of our more than 500 per episode listeners that we're getting every single time. We really appreciate every one of you as well. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.